My dudes.
Hey. Welcome to the 100th episode of Go FUD Yourself. JD Gagnon here. As you can see, we have a whole bunch of guests. I'm going to introduce everybody once we get on Twitter Spaces so that we don't have to do it twice. But it's the 100th episode. Someone asked earlier, how many days did it take? And Kiara very affectionately said 100. But it was actually 20 weeks. It's been 20 weeks already, which is kind of nuts. And it'll be no time before we have 1,000 episodes. Anyways, all right, we got all of our guests, or most of them, that have been here throughout the first 100 episodes. So we're going to talk about some of the common themes that we've had and so on. Kiara, what specifically are we talking about?
Okay, so we're going to talk about onboarding the next million users. We have two different topics for that. One is if we're going to look like Web 2 or if it's going to be gamification. And the other one is Mastercard versus CBDCs. And then we're going to talk about institutional moves. The more we see institutions joining, well, I've gotten really mad about it and JD's become more accepting of it. I think it's destroying DeFi, but he thinks it's accelerating blockchain finance. So we're going to talk about that. And then finally, we're going to talk about scams. Is this the cost of participation or is there a need for regulation?
All right. I think we got rugged on Twitter Spaces. So we're just going to remind everybody that it's a live show Monday to Friday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. Like, share, subscribe, do all that stuff. Bookmark us on Twitter because that really helps with reach. And make sure that your friends know that Go FUD Yourself exists. We don't want to be the worst, or we want to be the worst kept secret. That's it. All right. Let's fucking go.
And what's interesting, I was
And what we so security.
I think this is so cute.
Be that guy.
To be U.S. focused institutions that are now saying, we've tried. I have to say my video editing skills are pretty good, except I didn't do any of that. So our Twitter Spaces is still not up, so we'll just get going without Twitter Spaces for now. Any ideas, Kiara, just let me know. But we will start. How do you want to kick this one off? Where is Kiara? Oh. There. How do we get her on there? Uh-oh. Kiara, you got to come back on the screen.
JD, I need you to pay attention to the chat where I said, can you do all the intros, please?
Type in all caps.
Wah, wah, wah. Hey, you can tell we haven't had a whole bunch of guests on one stream before, so there's a first time for everything. Okay, so all the guests. I don't know what order they are on your screen, but we've got our friend Bullen from DeFi Kingdoms. What's up? Vincent, one of the co-founders from Hover Market. Thanks for coming. Christine, one of the founders of Tashi Finance. Leah, Miss Rugdoc. We've got Ben, Chainlink ambassador and is a good friend, used to work with us. We've got Chair from DGen World, Infinity Keys, and a million other DGen places. Thanks for joining, buddy. We've got Andy, founder of Infinity Keys. Patrick Kiefer, good friend of ours and founder of Aero Markets. And Lindsay, co-founder of Tashi Finance. And then also in the waiting room, do we have anybody that's not on here? No. All right, that's it. We got everybody. We got everybody introduced. All right, Kiara, we will get going.
Let's get started. So our first topic is onboarding the next million users. Is it a Web 2 lookalike or will it be gamification? So we've got wonderful Vincent, Andy, JD, and does anyone else want to join that?
Vincent, Andy, JD, and Bullen? Or who else we got?
Bullen, do you want to join that? Someone didn't come, so.
Oh,
let's do it.
Yeah.
Come on, hang out.
Awesome. Okay, I'm going to throw y'all up there. So, gamification or Web 2 lookalike. I know Vincent has a lot to say about this. What do you think?
Yeah, maybe I can start. I mean, I think, in order to onboard our next million users, it probably has to be something in between blockchain under the hood of a lot of these applications, or it might even be something where you incentivize people to partake in the ecosystem, whether it's like in the form of, like a network access token to participate in the ecosystem or something like that. At least that's kind of what I see from a more broader way, and just from, I guess, being in the space for a while.
So,
awesome. Andy, I was gonna throw it to you. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll take it.
All about games.
I hope It's not Web 2, because Web 2 games have developed this pattern already of, like if you look at the mobile game industry and casual sort of games, they cater to whales. They cater to people who are going to spend $500 to $1,000 on a game, and then everybody else is free to play, and it's just like this ad full experience. It's totally centralized. JT, you know well about this. We were just talking about this very recently. So I hope you're still hooked on that fun game.
Nah, but don't tell anybody about that.
These games, but the games, producing them and making them is also a danger, and so that's really what I'm concerned with. Is a million people might come and play some game, but to do that in the Web 2 version of the world, the way that games are made, 1,000 games fail completely, and then one succeeds. And that when we start adding tokens to game and like these other earn mechanics and this finance element, that leads to this really negative behavior, because everybody else who played those 1,000 games that didn't make it, now they've got tokens that are nothing. And now we've got people, we had 1 million people come in, but now we've got 1 million people that are really pissed. And one game success, and you've got this one niche audience. And I think that's kind of what happened in the last cycle to an extent. We just didn't get that, full Web 2, game experience. But I think there's danger there. So, I think that might happen, but I think that's a short-term gain. And to be successful for a real million users, we need native systems with gamification, with like game-like elements that do use tokens thoughtfully and incentivize and do use composability in these ways.
Amazing. I have some follow-up questions, but Bolin, let's jump over to you.
Oh, I might be a little bit biased, but I definitely think gamification is the way. To Andy's point, like the paradigm with the game success rate in Web 2 is going to be very critical. Whether we maintain that success rate or change it, hopefully it changes and we are able to have more successful games. And I think the measure of success is different as well. So in Web 2, you pretty much either make it or flop. Like there's really not a lot of in between. One of the things that I think is so interesting with gamification from a blockchain perspective and with, trade implications and finance aspects is you can be successful without being, Call of Duty. So there's a different middle ground there that exists in the Web3 space that doesn't exist in the Web2 space. That I think can be very crucial there as well, because as long as people are having fun playing your game and your economy is open and logical, that's always important. But then there's value to be had. So it's very much more so about, making that game enjoyable for people to play versus marketing. Like that's still an aspect, but if you have a fun game and people are able to own their assets, then there's always kind of a reason for them to come back.
Beauty. I'm going to take a bit of a contrarian stance on this one. I actually think the next million users are going to come via institutions. The next million users, I believe, and that catalyst is coming with the ETFs and all of these incumbent TradFi people starting to enter into the space a little bit. Onyx is coming, Base is coming, there's other ecosystems catering to those people. I think based on that, that it's going to look a lot more like Web 2 than we think. Now, not to say that there's not space for gamification. I think what DeFi Kingdoms, Infinity Keys, and many other platforms have done is incredible. It's very engaging. It evangelizes users, and people really feel like they're a part of something, which is a contrast, I think, to kind of the Web 2 experience. But what I think needs to happen, we've got the beginning of that adoption curve. The innovators and early adopters are here. And if we want the middle of the curve, the average consumer, I believe most of those people are looking for something that they're familiar with. There's a reason they haven't come on board yet. So to me, it comes down to user experience. I think the less that we have to think about the fact that it's on the blockchain, the more likely it is for a lot of those middle of the curve kind of users to jump ship, I guess, or at least start participating. Andy, a follow-up question for you. What, if anything, do you think is going to be the major source then? If gamification is the key, where are these users going to come from, in your opinion?
Sort of existing verticals. So people who are trading on Robinhood and are, they want to put Bitcoin in their own 401k. Those are the folks that are kind of naturally coming into crypto because they want more control. They want more self-sovereignty and more access. But I think it's similar with gaming. But I think those are very different verticals. I think that people who are working on those finance things aren't the same audience market of people that are going to come in and play the games. I think those are separate. So I do think they'll come from both sides. But I think as an industry, as a crypto industry, calling us one industry is already weird. We've got NFTs and art, and we've got social, and we've got finance, and we've got random shitcoins, and we've got games. We're starting to diverge, and I do think that those users will come in those kind of pre-selected categories. My in-laws, my relatives, they don't care about games, and they never will. They're old, but they do want to have control over their finances. They're interested in self-sovereignty. My father-in-law, this is notable, very boomer. Just asked me, okay, he's had Bitcoin for a while, but like he's ready for a hardware wallet. So next time I'm bringing him, I'm setting him up. We're doing this sort of thing. So that's where I think those people will come in. I do want to comment on something you said. I also think it's about the user experience. I don't disagree there at all. But what I do think about Web3 over the past year, if you've been paying attention to what's being built over the past year, it is getting smoother and smoother. And so the friction of like participating Web3 is dropping dramatically. And at this next cycle, whenever it is, whenever, numbers start to go up and people start to come back in, it's going to be real easy. And people are going to log in and not even know they're dealing with blockchain. That's what we talked about a couple of years ago. Now we're all building it and like it's live on many of those platforms. So, I don't think it's like we have to make things really enticing for people to come in. I think we have to make things not horrible for people to come in because they want to engage. We just have to make it easier for them to engage. And so they're not like having to do 10 steps. That was a problem with ours. Infinity Keys, we're working on this too. It's like, oh, how do we just make it better so it doesn't suck? But for somebody who comes in has to do 20 things and download a wallet and like all that. But we're getting there. So I think that time is coming across different separate verticals. I didn't want to cut Vincent off either. I didn't want to like jump in, but because he started it. So I do want to hear from you too, bro.
I was going to ask him another question. Okay. Just given your background, Vincent, you worked, with TradFi firms. You were kind of at the intersection of TradFi and DeFi, so to speak. I think in many different ways. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think do you think that the influx of users is going to be from those types of people, or are we still not there yet in your estimation?
I think it's definitely an iterative process. I think even I think I was back in 2017 or 2016 when I just started off, and back then it was relatively difficult to onboard. Right? At one point we had to go through Bitcoin ATMs to actually get Bitcoin. And then how do you transfer that into ETH after, right? The hoops that you had to jump over back then, it was relatively difficult. And now you're moving on to, MetaMask, and you have like EVM chains, and then you're moving on to Rabby, which already has the RPCs connected for you. So you can see everything from multiple chains. It's great, right? And then now when you're dealing with that, it's more so just being able to onboard users that way, like try to participate in the ecosystem. I think that's one of the bigger things, for them to kind of get your network access token, for example, your in-game currency or something like that. You need fast settlement. You need to take their fiat in order for them to participate in the ecosystem. And I think, a lot of these things are pretty difficult to do before. But now that we're working with a lot of these, like liquidity aggregators, smart order routers and things like that, it makes it so that a lot of the companies can focus on user experience, while a lot of the, more so institutional focused firms are focused on the settlement, are focused on the processing of the, whatever digital assets there might be. And then they can take care of the money part under the hood, so we can kind of focus on the user experience. We can focus on the onboarding, and whether it's doing GameFi or DeFi, it's just making that we're kind of tasked with making that job easier, right? There's that whole crypto thing of the crypto ethos about you're being your own bank. You can cut out the middleman, but I feel like that sometimes you need the middleman just as someone to blame if you know, like shit hits the fan or something like that. And I feel like that a lot of retail need that. Just, you know, very similar to how you go to a bank and you know, address a bank teller to do something, and people still go through that avenue as opposed to, you know, just going on your easy web or going on online banking. I feel like that there's two types of I guess like customer segments, and some people prefer, you know, the handheld way, and some people do prefer self-sovereignty over your own assets. And
There's only,
as long as
there's only a few people. Sorry to interrupt you. There's only a few people that would say easy web, and only a few people that would hear it and understand that you're from Canada. If you're Canadian, if you live in Canada, or if you've spent time in Canada, you'd know what easy web is. Bolin, any final thoughts on this one? We've got about 60 seconds left.
Yeah, I would just add, I think the next million users come from not knowing that they're using Web3, that it's all under the hood. They have no idea that it's so seamless. The wallets are integrated, you know, to the point where they aren't having to sign every transaction because of session keys. I think the next million users, they'll be active participants, or if we're only counting active participants, that is. I still don't think they'll even really know that they're on Web3, which is even better. To Andy's point about, you know, smoothing the wallet integration, the wallet setup process, getting past the terrifying warning messages about private keys, and just making that an easy flow and easy entry process.
I think my guesstimation, just as we wrap up this topic, is it's going to be Web 5, and Jack Dorsey is going to take us to the next million users.
Ben, you hate Jack Dorsey.
I thought you just kicked me off as I said that.
I thought about it. I've done it before.
All right.
This is a really fun topic, and part of why we do our next topic is because this is the perfect segue. Are people going to notice that they're actually being transitioned from Web 2 to Web 3, and is that important? And part of how we talk about that is MasterCard. So if you follow us all the time, you know that I believe it's now corporations versus government. It's no longer, it's not what it used to be. But our next topic is MasterCard versus CBDCs. We have the wonderful Christine, we've got Ben, and we have Patrick. So JD, you're stuck up here.
Aha! Hot damn! All right, Ben, Christine, hello. Patrick, welcome. Okay, so we've talked a lot about this in the last little bit. If you've been watching the episodes, or you've probably been a guest on one recently, then we'll have talked about this. But MasterCard versus CBDCs. And so the comparison here is MasterCard is really, really pushing to build deep and global partnerships. Many different jurisdictions they're looking at applying for and securing licensing and so on and so forth to be custodians and different things. And so the claim, or at least the theory, is that they're trying to compete, or at least be a viable alternative to CBDCs. Now, anybody that knows me, I'm not a very big fan of CBDCs, but I will save my opinions for after we hear from you guys. So Ben, I'd love to hear what you think about CBDC, MasterCard versus CBDCs.
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that they want to be a CBDC. If you look, they announced, I think 6 days ago, they're launching effectively the App Store, right? So the Apple App Store for DeFi apps, what they're trying to launch. The thing I think that people forget about MasterCard is they have probably the most information on how people are spending their money than any other company in the world. I mean, vis-a-vis Visa as well, because all of the credit card payments that go through them, they know it's not just a movement of money between two accounts. They can see the merchant, the vendor, what it's being paid for. There's a lot of data they hold. So their whole space is understanding the flow of money. So my take on it is that they're much more interested in protecting their business, right? So if everything moves away from card payments and wires onto crypto payments that are irrevocable and more secure, and they aren't in that space, then their business goes under. So they have to move to crypto settlements. Otherwise, I think they can see the writing on the wall. The business model's in a lot of trouble. That's a very different motivating factor to CBDC. The fastest two movers, in my opinion, that we can see, or the ones that have come out the gate with some of the more restrictive elements, is India and China. They limit their currency, their normal TradFi currency, to protect, or in their way have control over their economy and inflation differently to a lot of other countries, right? So the rupee and China currencies are restricted in terms of how you can spend them and exchange them, cross-border stuff. So they had to move first. Those are very different motivating factors, I think. So I can't see Mastercard competing directly with CBDC. They might end up having some crossover here and there, but I feel like they're different motivating factors.
Yeah, I think that at least the way that it was presented in the articles that we talked about and read was that they're not saying we can be a CBDC, but rather there's no need for CBDCs if Mastercard has the appropriate global network. Patrick, my man, I know we've written about this. We talk about this often. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense that, this is kind of their area of expertise, managing and designing these large payment networks. So it's kind of a natural infrastructure play for them. I don't think it's a substitute for a CBDC. I mean, they're working with multiple central banks, and they're not providing the entire suite of capabilities to any of the central banks. So there's this, and I think that's healthy to have this kind of mixing between some private players providing some pieces of the infrastructure, some components, and then cooperating with central banks to provide some of the other components. And then that kind of makes it less likely that any one central bank is going to have kind of complete authority over essentially the pipes that implement anything like a CBDC. So I think it's healthy to have these private players who already have kind of domain expertise to be designing and providing some of the infrastructure.
Beautiful. Thank you. Christine, what are your thoughts on this one? You're muted. You're muted. You're muted. You're muted.
I'm muted. It's because I'm such a good participant. I make sure that I turn it off because I never know what I'm going to say. I had some opinions on the topic before this, but it leads into it perfectly. I think it's just, if you back up, you could say, like, it's super bullish that, you talked about onboarding the next million people. Things like this with MasterCard just show, like, as much as people want to shut down DeFi and are talking bad about it all the time, on the other hand, you have governments who are like, but CBDCs are great. And MasterCard is like, we're making moves in this direction. So, I mean, as a whole, if you just take a step back and try not to analyze every specific little thing for exactly what it is, I think that both things will move forward. But I believe that in integrating more people into the space, moves like MasterCard is taking are going to be all the difference in the world, because like they were saying before, you won't even know. So I think in the end, if you have to put them against each other and say who's going to win that race, the people that make the most money off of it will win the race, and that's MasterCard. Because, a CBDC, yes, you have total control over your country, but I think that on a global scale, a private company that has access to everyone is going to win, right?
Awesome. I'll give you my thoughts, and then I'll give you guys a chance to respond. But I am not a fan of CBDCs at all. I've been pretty vocal about that. I think there's a few reasons. Again, I say this all the time. It's a slippery slope. I think it's a slippery slope. And we're seeing this with fiat. We saw it, to use your examples, Ben, China, India, and their fiat currencies have been restricted. There's been quasi-social credits. There's been reporting and frozen bank accounts and nationalized banking infrastructure and all of these things that have caused all of this kind of nanny state power vacuum, I suppose. And CBDCs will be that on steroids. If they own the CBDC, the central bank, I mean, obviously they want to do that so that they still have control over monetary policy. If in fact digital currencies start to replace fiat. With that being said, I just think it's a huge slippery slope. And anytime that we see governments with the opportunity to power grab and have more control and oversight, it usually happens. My problem with that is it's very rarely rolled back. So once they take those liberties and take some of that freedom and privacy away from people, you're not getting it back. And so, it's one little straw on the camel over and over and over again. And before you know it, you can have your bank account frozen because you said something on Twitter that the powers that be don't like. Of course, that's a pretty illogical end for that, but I mean, it's possible. So anyways, I hope MasterCard wins on this one. I think that it's probably a better solution because, to Patrick's point, there is a bit of a split between, the government will still have some oversight via regulation and different things. But I think having a private entity in the middle somewhere leaves market forces where they should be, which I'm a big fan of. Follow up on that, Ben? Yeah, I think it's two things for me. I think that I can see Mastercard, if they pull off this app store, be an accelerator for the DeFi space. You put a big name like Mastercard behind it, everyone knows Mastercard globally. It adds that psychological comfort piece, and if they can prove they have the encryption, everything needed, I mean, they're looking at doing it, I think, in a private Ethereum chain. If that all gets pulled off correctly, then that's going to be very, very good for DeFi, I think, just having that behind it. If they then partner with, say, Ripple or Circle or someone in that space where they're trying to actually build out the best payment network possible using the technology, that will fundamentally transform how value is exchanged globally. The CBDC piece, I see that more as a decelerator. I can see why central banks would want to come in and control their monetary policy, because it's obviously values being exchanged in and out of their currency. So I can see it going towards on-ramp, off-ramp limitations, that you can only get in and out of a currency through the CBDC on that country. I think China looked at that already. It makes sense why there's 130 CBDCs being launched right now. So one's speeding things up. One is, I think, in my mind, the government's trying to keep control of their little playpen, but we're at a place now where it's going to become global. So it'd be interesting to see how those two things clash. It'll be really interesting to make the first Forex CBDC market. If there isn't someone working on that right now, I would be shocked. Maybe there is. Somebody's working on it right now. All of that being said, Patrick, what are you thinking? Follow up on this? Yeah, I mean, just to echo some of what you were saying, I think there are some bad case scenarios for CBDCs. But I think the role of players like Mastercard helps to kind of make those worst case scenarios less likely. So if we already, maybe you're concerned about a CBDC implementation in the US down the line where enforcement agencies can just, call the Treasury and freeze accounts of, arbitrary people that they're investigating, could end up being political and so forth. They're, like you were saying, it's a slippery slope. But I think the more that these private players help to develop the infrastructure and play a role in terms of providing some of the ingredients, it just makes it much less likely that those worst case scenarios will materialize. And like Ben was saying, some central banks have different objectives. I think this is pretty clear in the US. If we already have a fair amount of the infrastructure built out by private players, then that infrastructure can be used to kind of address a lot of the concerns or the objectives that the U.S. central bank would have for a CBDC. But maybe not in China, maybe not in India, because they still want to have, like Ben was saying, they have control over capital flows. They're obviously much more, let's say, liberal with their political persecutions. In other words, they do them a lot more, aggressively. And so, the story might be a little different for some of these other central banks, but for the U.S., having these private players, build out some of the infrastructure, I think helps mitigate the worst case scenarios. I think I'll get your opinion on this, Christine, but I mean, it's easy to say, yeah, in some of these like kind of authoritative jurisdictions, then yeah, of course, there's going to be kind of the nanny state social credit system. But even in places like Canada, as recent as the COVID situation, there was a whole bunch of bank accounts frozen by what is considered one of the global leaders on freedom and so on in Canada. Christine, you're Canadian. What does this what does that tell you? Is that an example of the slippery slope, or is that an isolated event?
Just not a slippery slope. Like, that is the bad in action. That's where it is. I mean, if they already could go in and say like, oh, you think you want to participate in this? Well, no more money for you. Then they just have all the more access. They don't have to get specific banking approval. They just run the show, the whole show. They can shut down anything at any time. And that's what I was going to say. Like, MasterCard better win this game with the, versus CBDCs, just in terms of getting their word out fast enough, getting everything there happening faster. Because the CBDCs are just going to come out and say, like, with this currency, you cannot transfer to whatever else you want to be in DeFi, right? Like, that's where the regulation is going to come in. They're going to be like, cool, you got this currency that we provide. Well, you can't, but I mean, they already do it with fiat money, right? Like, you can't participate in the States. You can't participate in Canada for a lot of things. They're just going to have that much more control. They're going to say, you can't convert our currency token into whatever it is you want to do. So I think it's just really important that private money stays working for us. Private thought leaders, private companies, people need to be out there making these things happen, because it's going to be crazy. Like, the amount of control that they have through CBDCs, like, I don't think people get it. There's no hiding anything. There's not that you want to hide things, but I mean, we do. And also we want to be able to make decisions, and that you will not be able to do. So, I mean, yeah, it's just it's a huge, important topic.
Amazing. Thank you. Kiara?
I think this becomes a pretty easy segue into, should institutions be playing in DeFi at all? I mean, some of that original ethos of DeFi, some of that original ethos of blockchain was that we were going to democratize, we were going to revolutionize finance. And now, are we going to be able to do that if Deloitte and Shopify and every other major player are there? Is there still going to be a competitive landscape in the same way? Or are we just moving into the traditional TradFi, if you will? So for this particular discussion, we have Vincent, Cher, Lindsay, and Ben. So Ben, you're sticking around. And then let's get everyone else on here. JD, this is why you're not supposed to leave. All right. Chair, I can't move you. There we go. So I think this is a really interesting group to have for this discussion, because we have Ben, who works in TradFi, Cher, who is incredibly anti-bank, Vincent, who has moved from big player crypto to the small player crypto, and Lindsay, I think you're the newest entrant to being a DGen here. So just to kind of kick us off, where do you stand? Do you think that we're destroying DeFi?
I just have so many thoughts on this, because especially what Christine and everyone was saying about what's happened in Canada lately. I'm just so anti-government control. And so my personal opinion is that, I think it's going to stifle DeFi quite a bit, but I understand that we can't avoid it. It's unavoidable. So I think in the end, it's going to end up being kind of a hybrid situation where we have, a lot more maybe like older generation user adoption once the regulation comes in, a little bit more security, stuff like that. And then on the other end, it might stifle innovation, but it might create a way where like different innovation comes in, where we are partnering with institutions and we're following regulations and stuff like that. I don't know. This topic is pretty multifaceted. It's a tough one.
Ben, as a TradFi guy, do you think that TradFi is destroying DeFi?
Really good question. I think there's going to be two sides to it, right? So I think TradFi is going to come in. They're going to build big corporate systems like you have in TradFi already. But the interesting thing is the technology is still going to be there. So for those that want to still step out of the matrix and be able to run their own financial systems that don't require them to provide their social security number and all these things, I think that'll exist. And for those that have early adopters that have stepped in already, they'll always build what they need in the space. I think it's hard now because it's such a global technology to limit it now. But then the masses will use the big recognized brands and names, whether that's brainwashing or it's security or it's social influence. These people who have yet to have a wallet are probably going to, over the next 5 to 10 years, get one with a big bank or a big, like a Mastercard, or there'll be some push from a CBDC. Those people that still want to use the technology to set themselves to some extent financially free, I think it'll be both. I don't think it's necessarily bad, these big TradFi companies coming in. What I get nervous around is where regulation starts to limit how you're allowed to move your money and how much information you have to provide to governments when you're moving it. So on ramp, off ramp, I think is a very interesting space. And then taxation. That's where I get nervous. But in terms of being able to move money, being able to crowdsource lending, there's so much that can happen. Like soon you may be able to crowdsource your own mortgage, where you're not borrowing from a bank, but you're borrowing from 2,000 people in your city that want to see someone that's had generational stay in the same city get a cheaper mortgage. There's all sorts of things that could be done. I think that'll exist. And then you'll still have these big players coming in and doing very boring things with the technology.
Chair, I think you might break your pen if you don't get the chance to tell Ben how much you make.
I'm taking copious notes. No, I agree with Ben. I think on every point that he's making. A few years ago, the $1 trillion market cap for the entire space is a milestone that someone, I don't remember who, but they said look out for that, because as soon as we cross that, we get into a territory where the big players are incentivized to come in and play all their games. And we're seeing that. And I think when we crossed the $1 trillion, I think we crossed it, and then wars and bear markets and things, so we've stepped back. But I think now I'm not keeping my eye on that number every day, but I think we've once again crossed back over. If not, we will soon. But the big players are here, and we're talking about it. And they have been here. MIT was propping up founders, quote unquote, back in 2017, doing ICOs. Are any of them still around, by the way? And we know about other founders that MIT has propped up since then. Not to get too deep into that, but that $1 trillion market cap, when that happened, it was game on. We're always going to have, as long as there are EVMs, as long as there's Ethereum or a world computer and a world database that is a distributed consensus mechanism that cannot be pwned, or it's very, very hard, DeFi will exist. And the big players will increasingly try to block access to that. And there will be all of the stories behind it, from bad actors are using it to drug dealers to worse. But let's not forget that banks are the very ones who prop up all these activities already, very well aware, from the minor things to the very major and evil things. They prop up all of them. They take their cut. They help make it happen. They probably have been helping make it happen in DeFi already. And it's up to the whales, it's up to those angel magical whales to create the liquidity on those chains that will still be accessible, because they can't. If the bridges still exist and the tokens come over, the liquidity will exist and the users will come, and that's going to be the cat and mouse game that I see happening over the next 5 years or so.
Vince, jump in there. You're muted. Our private chat is blowing up about this topic, so maybe we'll have to have another one. Okay, Vince, go ahead. Oh no, you're gone.
Oh, Vince,
There.
Is it on your mic, Vince, or is it in the? Oh, there you go.
There we go.
Now, right? Now it's working? Okay,
Yeah.
awesome. But yeah, no, I completely see where you guys are coming from. I definitely agree with that, right? I come from the institutional side, so work with a lot of the centralized exchanges and, formerly TradFi as well. So with a lot of the ETFs that are coming in here, they grant global exposure to the asset class. That's never a bad thing, because as you can kind of see it as an asset class, you can see general retail look at it like, okay, BlackRock, Fidelity, everybody's kind of looking at this as a real asset class. Then they start breaking it in, right? Very similar to tech stocks. You're looking at like SaaS, medtech, fintech. I don't see that as something that's very different from crypto, where you're looking at GameFi, DeFi, lending protocols, and etc. Right? And then you slowly divvy that up and you kind of build out an ecosystem about that, right? And even from that, at my time at crypto.com, we dealt with a lot of institutional interest, especially in terms of staking, and the onboarding process was, a big pain in the ass, right? We had to deal with custody, right? Our custodial partners that are approved from the FI and from us. We had to look at the compliance as well as the procedures. And the bigger thing is that centralized exchanges are relatively important to that, because not only are people getting exposure through ETFs, which is not exactly crypto that you can take out, but you can you can get that as exposure, and you can look to, you know, centralized exchanges and see what they're offering in their ecosystem, right? You have to go through a whole listing procedure. And I think that the centralized exchanges take a lot of the risk on that side by being able to do that due diligence and then be able to onboard, you know, KYC users, and then have them most importantly be able to withdraw their assets into their own, you know, MetaMask or whatever wallet they're using. From there, you can kind of participate in the ecosystem, right? Non-custodial protocols or custodial and things like that. And, you know, at the end of the day, that matters the most to me, because not only are you getting, you know, this kind of like stamp of approval from TradFi saying, hey, this is a real thing, but you're also getting the option to, if you want to go deeper into the ecosystem, you're able to withdraw, you're able to participate, you're able to become kind of, you know, people in the ecosystem, DeFi, as you may call it, right? And through all of this, you know, I think that everyone kind of goes with a sandbox approach too, right? Like you have a lot of these like degens and everybody just building stuff on, you know, like the deep corners of Web3. And until it becomes something big, that's when it kind of gets the, you know, the attraction. But in between that time, you have a lot of these people, you know, that maybe get rugged on the way, maybe they lose something on the way, but through these iterations, it becomes kind of like the final product that, you know, TradFi or these participants will be eventually be using. So that's kind of my take on it. I think that they work hand in hand.
This has been such a fantastic discussion, because all of us are from pretty different backgrounds, but there is kind of a crossroads about how we think about TradFi joining. But I have to, before we move on from this discussion, I have to ask everybody, give me a thumbs up if you think that banks are destroying DeFi, and give me a thumb down if you think institutions are not.
Is there a sideways?
There's no middle ground.
I don't think they're destroying it.
Yeah, I don't think they can. I don't think it's possible anymore. I think now that Pandora's box is open, they will do what they can. But
they're going to come in and make some big moves that'll be significantly more boring and less creative, because that's what big institutions do potentially. But they'll put structure in place, which then more creative, more adventurous people can build from, I think.
Yeah, well, it's mostly the money inflow and outflow, right? You have the travel rule implementations coming in soon. I'm just like, what if I'm just withdrawing liquidity from this pool? Like, where does that come from now? So it's a lot of these uncategorized things that kind of come with TradFi guidelines.
You know, one of the things that Vincent and I actually talked about yesterday was how are institutions going to invest in enough security and training to not get scammed by degens. So I don't know if you've ever worked anywhere corporate, but if you ever took an anti-phishing class and then clicked on an email later that day, I've met you in my office. And so our next topic is actually exactly about scams. So we get to introduce Leah, who is directly working in scams and education at all time. Bolin has jumped in on this topic. We've got Patrick and Sherry, you're staying up here. So just to kind of kick us off, do you think that scams are kind of a rite of passage, or do you believe that this needs to be something regulated? Bolin's already laughing, but Sherry,
are you reading my notes? Are you reading my notes? That literally was the first thing that I wrote down, is that they're a rite of passage depending on how long you've been here. The very first NFT project that I really aped into scanned me of basically all my ETH, which was not an insignificant amount. Slow Drip and Slow Rug, very, very, very experienced scammers that have been around. It's not the place to call them out, so I won't. But it was a rite of passage in that it's interesting because they were so good at it. It kind of ties into what we were discussing a moment ago in the debate about institutions. Everything gets built by the scammers first. The scammers figure out how to leverage all of these tools for their evil needs first, similar to how some of the more seedy parts of the internet do things first. You know, like there's one industry that always does everything first in the internet, and then everyone catches up. See, like the scammers in this space, they do everything first, then everyone learns about how to protect themselves, and then institutions adopt it, or more righteous players take those tools and run with them. But boy, oh boy, do the scammers get in there first and figure things out. It's an interesting flow.
I mean, I feel like scams shouldn't be a rite of passage. They were for me 100%. That's how I wound up doing what I did. I got scammed for also a not insignificant amount, and my husband just got absolutely wrecked, and he lost like a massive amount of money, like legitimately day 2 DeFi for us. We're just like, oh, this seems fun and cool, and wow, look at all these crazy yields that we can take advantage of, and then like 48 hours in, gone. But it shouldn't be, because that's the impediment, whether you're talking like users or institutions or governments or whatever is going to take like the next stage of growth in DeFi, or at least just like keep our industry, growing and evolving and moving. People are disincentivized when they lose all of their money. Nobody wants to lose all their money. Institutions won't go in if they lose all their money. Nobody wants that. Like, I don't want that. So I think it shouldn't be a rite of passage, but then that brings us to the discussion of how do you want to tackle that? Because being able to prevent scams usually involves some degree of centralization or trust in a more centralized resource. So, I mean, our community has attempted in various ways to deal with reducing scams, whether it's by using something like RugDoc or PrimeDAO or something like that, or by trying to teach the community that they need certain amounts of security practices in place before you invest your money. But clearly it hasn't worked that well, because we're still getting scammed out of hundreds of millions of dollars, if not billions of dollars every year. I mean, right now, first half of 2023, we're out like almost $700 million just in DeFi. And that's not crypto, that's just DeFi. Last year, what was it? It was about 4 billion in DeFi and like 15 or 16 billion lost to scams in crypto. Those are not numbers that we want around. And that really has disenfranchised a lot of people. I've brought people in and been like, wow, this is a really great way to take control of your finance and to be an independent investor and move money at all hours of the day or night. It really is liberating. And I'll teach them and I'll give them basic security practices, and I'll set them up with their hardware wallets and with their, decentralized wallets, and teach them all the methods. And they're actually okay up to a point of the whole 10 steps to do anything. They actually will make it if there's enough of a carrot at the end. But the second that they lose their money, they're just like, all right, there's 10 steps and I just lost like 50% of my, money that I was willing to invest in this. I'm done. And that's not something that you want. So again, I think we're just kind of at the balance of how do you regulate to some degree, because with some degree of regulation comes some degree of community trust, and you need community trust in order to exist and grow.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to one of my favorite topics of all time, which is security versus freedom and or privacy, depending on how you want to define it. It's funny. It's almost like y'all put this episode together to like flow between topics or something. So, it's like there was a plan. But, to answer the question, are scams a cost of doing business? It depends on what you want the business to do. If we want Web3 to stay a niche area where people come to just highly innovate, maybe make a lot of money, maybe lose a lot of money, there's really no telling, but it'll always be a smaller group, then yeah, scams are a rite of passage. Absolutely. Comes with the territory. If we want mass adoption, no, can't have scams as a rite of passage, because we won't have mass adoption. You can't have both. Personally, I'm more in favor of mass adoption because it's better for the space. Yes, there is the potential, as mentioned before, that may limit innovation a little bit. But, going back to the topic near the beginning of, having Web3 under the hood, having people using protocols with wallets and not even really realizing that the wallets are there, those funds have to be protected. Because if they don't even know that the wallet is there and the wallet gets compromised, the end user should not be on the hook for that. I mean, that's like if my bank account gets hacked or, somebody steals my credit card number, I get those funds back because I did not take that action. And so very similar in my mind to that situation. What I actually foresee, and when I say foresee, what I hope happens, what I would love to see come to fruition is that, Web3 kind of becomes two space. Well, it's already 47 spaces, but there's two main portions of the Web3 space, and some could call one of them Web4, and that's fine as well. One remains kind of like it is today. It's very unregulated. You go there for the most innovation, the most risk, the most reward. that area stays pretty open. But the other area is more consumer friendly, more regulated, more protected. Personally, I think so. In the U.S., we all have social security numbers, right? You get assigned it at birth, you have it until you die. It's who you are. It links to you directly. I think we will also end up with a wallet address. So we will have a social security address and an OX, and the government will have that OX. The IRS will have that OX. That will be our wallet. And that would be the wallet that has consumer protections because it's fully doxed, it's fully KYC'd, it's everybody knows that wallet has consumer protections because that's what it's meant for. It's meant for the regulated and the industried portion of Web3. That does not mean that I can't go create my own wallet, fully anonymous. Well, anonymous, but I can't go create my own wallet and do exactly what I do today in Web3 with that wallet, with no protections, with no regulation, well, with light regulation, no protections, full risk on myself because it is an unregistered wallet. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a good thing. Give people the opportunity to take on risk themselves, to manage their own funds, to make their own choices, just what DeFi's goal is right now, but also have an option for them to be protected and regulated.
Yeah, I'll agree, I think, with maybe 2/3 of the sentiment I've heard so far, which is, I hope that scams don't continue to be a rite of passage. I think, in order for the technology to scale, you're going to have to see, a much lower incidence of scams. But I think there's another really interesting trade-off at play. So you mentioned the security versus the freedom. I think there's another trade-off, which is right now when the barriers to entry are very low, there can be lots of innovation. So there are a lot of new projects kind of in the cross section at any point in time. A lot of new experiments being run essentially. But because the barriers to entry are so low, the costs are low, the average project quality is also lower. There's more scams. And so we have this, we almost went too far in terms of making it easy to innovate. And we kind of have to come back a little. We like that innovation, but we don't want to go so far that the barriers to entry are so low that it's so easy to kind of push these scams out.
That's fantastic. I'm sad that we have to kind of wrap this one up. Leah, as you are the professional in scams, has anybody changed your mind today? Do you think that, that we should go back to ensuring that everyone gets scammed at least once?
No. no, thank you. I don't want to get scammed, and I'm pretty sure the majority of the population's with me on that one, except for maybe the scammers. They might feel otherwise.
Okay, amazing. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I know that this was a long, exciting, messy episode. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been episode 100, and JD is here to wrap us all up. I
was going to say, am I? I don't think I'm here to wrap us all up. It's been a lot of fun, the first 100 episodes. I feel like we've covered a ton of topics, and we've had some amazing guests. So thank you all for your support so far, and everybody that's watching, thank you a ton for your support. We've been humbled by the amount of people actually that consistently watch the show and make comments on it and send feedback and so on. So we will keep doing it. We'll keep doing it for another 100 episodes. Maybe we'll try something fun, maybe an IRL event for the 200th episode. We'll see. Live show, Monday to Friday, 12:30 p.m. Eastern. All of these places, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter Spaces normally, except for today. And we are also on Spotify. So we're all over the place. Make sure you share, spread the love, help us get the word out. And with that, I say to all of you today, go FUD yourself.
Go FUD yourself.
Go FUD yourself. Cheers.
Go FUD yourself.
Happy 100. Bye, guys.
Have a great one.